Tonight, we return to the ruins of Angkor Wat, built by men or gods. The air is thick and cool, and the mist drapes itself like silk across the jungle canopy. Somewhere in the darkness, water laps gently against stone, and the faint scent of wet earth rises with the slow breath of the forest. Ahead, the first hints of dawn bleed into the sky, staining the clouds in strokes of coral and gold. Through the shifting fog, the temple towers emerge, black silhouettes carved against the newborn light, their lotus-shaped crowns reaching upward as if to pierce the heavens themselves. You stand at the edge of the great moat, a still mirror broken only by ripples from some unseen creature beneath. Across that vast expanse of water lies the causeway, stretching like a stone bridge between the world of the living and something far older. The jungle is silent, as though holding its breath for what you are about to witness. You probably wouldn't survive this place in its prime, where warriors guarded every gate and priests whispered in a tongue long since lost. But tonight, you will walk where kings once walked, unharmed. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The mist curls away from the temple as you cross the ancient stones. The first light of day catches on the weathered carvings, each groove worn by centuries of rain. Historians note Angkor Wat's construction began in the early 12th century under the reign of Suryavarman II, a temple built to honor Vishnu, the preserver of the universe. Yet among the Khmer elders, another story persists, that the gods themselves set the first stones, guiding mortal hands with unseen power. The causeway feels endless, flanked by broken balustrades shaped like Naga serpents, whose stone eyes still gleam with menace. Somewhere behind those gates is a truth no one agrees upon, how a kingdom carved a city of such impossible scale from the earth, and whether it was ever meant for humans alone. The reflection of the towers in the moat trembles in the wind, as if the gods are stirring in their sleep. The air grows warmer as the sun rises higher, spilling molten light across the temple's outer wall. Shadows retreat, revealing intricate carvings along its surface, rows of divine warriors locked in battle, celestial beings riding upon mythical beasts, and kings kneeling before gods whose eyes seem to follow you. Each figure has been cut with such precision that even after 9 centuries, the edges remain sharp. Suryavarman, too, stands at the center of this story. History tells us he was a king of vision, consolidating power across the Khmer Empire and expanding its borders. But here, in the stone narrative of Angkor Wat, he appears not just as a ruler, but as one chosen by the heavens. The temple's design itself reflects his ambition, built not as a place for daily worship, but as a cosmic mountain, an earthly replica of Mount Meru, the home of the gods. You picture him in his prime, standing at this very threshold, his golden crown catching the light, the scent of sandalwood and lotus drifting in the air. The clang of ceremonial bells echoes down the causeway, priests murmuring in the ancient tongue as offerings of rice and flowers are placed at the altar. According to one enduring legend, Suryavarman did not commission the temple as a mortal would, but after a vision in which Vishnu appeared, promising the king a throne in the afterlife if he built a home worthy of the divine. Historians still argue whether this vision was myth, political theater, or something far stranger. You step inside the first gallery, where the light dims and the air cools. The scent of old stone and dust hangs heavy. Here, you imagine the day the first block was laid, quarried miles away at Phnom Kulen, each sandstone slab hauled by elephant and raft, its edges smoothed by hundreds of hands. The sheer logistics boggle the mind, millions of stones transported through dense jungle and across rivers, then fitted together without mortar. Even with modern technology, such a feat would be daunting. Without it, almost unthinkable. And yet, whispers among the old Khmer folk speak of Nik-Ta, guardian spirits of the land, who carried the stones by night. They say these spirits moved silently under the cover of darkness, their giant forms cloaked in mist, placing each block with inhuman precision. Skeptics dismiss this as folklore born of awe, but as you run your fingers over the seamless joints between the stones, you can almost imagine hands larger than yours at work. A breeze stirs through the corridor, carrying the faint rustle of palm leaves outside. The light slants in through narrow windows, illuminating dust motes that drift like tiny spirits. It's easy to believe that the line between myth and history is thin here, as thin as the shadow that flickers across the floor and disappears before you can see its source. You step deeper into the gallery, your footsteps soft against the worn stone. Outside, the jungle hum grows louder, a chorus of cicadas, the occasional cry of a bird unseen, and the faint slap of water against the moat's edge. Here, the temple's outer walls stretch for hundreds of meters, enclosing a space so vast that the mind struggles to hold its full shape. The bas-reliefs come alive in the dim light. Here, the famed churning of the ocean of milk unfolds across nearly 50 meters of stone. Hundreds of celestial beings and demons strain against the coils of the Naga serpent Vasuki, their faces carved in expressions of unyielding effort. Above them, gods look on with serene detachment, while the froth of the cosmic ocean spills in waves of chiseled detail. It's more than just art, it's a cosmological blueprint, a reminder that Angkor Wat is not merely a temple, but a map of the universe, laid in stone for those who can read it. Historians agree that these reliefs are among the most ambitious in human history, yet there's another layer. Some Khmer storytellers claim the scenes are more than sacred myths, they are records of actual events. According to them, the gods' battle against chaos took place not in some celestial realm, but right here, in an age before humans. The churning of the ocean, they say, was a metaphor for the reshaping of the world after a great flood, one that left only the chosen few to rebuild. As you walk, the reliefs seem to shift. The shadows carve deeper lines into the demons' faces, and the Naga's coils seem to ripple, as though the serpent might uncoil at any moment. A trick of the light, you tell yourself, yet you can't shake the feeling that the walls remember. Deeper still, you enter a corner where the carvings bear scars. Some figures have had their faces deliberately chipped away. Historians still argue whether this was vandalism during religious shifts, from Hinduism to Buddhism, or a deliberate act to trap a spirit within the stone by erasing its visage. Khmer folklore warns of statues that hold grudges and of travelers who fall ill after disrespecting them. The air here feels heavier, as if charged. You pause, resting a hand against the wall, feeling the fine grain of the sandstone beneath your fingertips. Imagine the artisans who worked here, bare-chested in the sweltering heat, their chisels tapping in a rhythm that echoed for years. Each strike of metal against stone was a prayer, a promise, or perhaps a bargain with forces they didn't dare name aloud. A shaft of sunlight falls through a narrow slit, illuminating a small carving almost hidden in the shadows, a figure neither god nor man, its face obscured by time, but its hands outstretched as though offering you something. A warning? A blessing? The meaning is lost, just as the voice of the carver is lost. All that remains is the sense that you've stepped into a place where the past is still breathing, just beneath the surface. He crosses the second enclosure as morning ripens into a white-gold blaze, and the towers begin to cast long blade-straight shadows across the paving. In their geometry, he senses a sentence written not in ink but in angles. The causeway ahead does not merely lead, it points. To walk it is to be drawn upon a line that feels older than the earth that holds it. He stops where the axis concentrates, where the western approach narrows the world to a single sight, 5 lotus crowns stacked against the open sky, turning the horizon into a dial. Angkor Wat is an enigma of direction. Most Khmer temples face east for the rising sun, but this one opens to the west, the realm of Vishnu, preserver and lord of the setting light. He stands within that paradox as the sun climbs behind him, and he imagines another hour, another season, when the first rim of dawn will stall on the central tower and pour its fire through the doorways in a corridor of light. Pilgrims still gather at the equinox to witness it, the sunrise lifted and framed by the highest prasat, the reflection doubling upon the moat so that sky seems to enter water and return perfected. That is no rumor. It is a thing the stone still does. The old men of the villages say the temple does more than salute a season. They say its axis is the staff of a god and its sanctuaries the measured steps of the heavens. On certain nights, they whisper, the stars themselves descend along this line, cloaked as apsaras, and brush the lintels with starlight, leaving the pillars faintly warm to the hand. Others insist the Naga balustrades do not merely guard the causeway. They are the Milky Way tamed to earth, a serpent of living light that knows the path between worlds. The tale is fearless in its claim. The temple does not imitate the sky. It persuades the sky to imitate it. He has come to the cruciform terrace where the galleries cross like the ribs of a great creature at rest. Here, he kneels beside a threshold stone, its surface cut with faint grids and tiny holes, like the ghost of a measuring board. He pictures surveyors with cord and plumb bob, men who watch the sun mark the same scar of light day after day until the axis fixed, and the first alignment leapt true from earth to heaven. A historical fact steadies the reverie. These builders carved and set more than 5 million sandstone blocks, fitted them so cleanly the joints refused the blade of a knife, and laid their temple foursquare upon a plan that obeys cardinal directions to a precise and stubborn degree. Yet precision alone is not the story. It is the purpose of precision that begins to speak. He looks north to Phnom Bakheng, the older mountain temple that, in certain seasons, receives the sun like a visiting sovereign. Lines, real and imagined, sew Angkor's hills and moats and towers into a fabric that seems to breathe when the light moves. Scholars have noted how the dimensions of the central quincunx, its steps, tiers, and concentric galleries, may echo cycles of time, solar years, lunar months, the churning turns of mythic eras. But whether these numbers are deliberate calculations or the happy coincidences of a sacred grammar is a question still standing in the court of debate. Historians still argue whether Angkor Wat served as an astronomical instrument as well as a sanctuary, or whether its fidelity to the sky is the consequence of a symbol taken seriously. Mount Meru planted upon the plain, drawing the cosmos to scale. He moves into shadow and counts the breaths until his eyes settle. Along the wall, shallow niches hold the soft soot ghosts of ancient lamps. He can almost hear the ritual. A priest setting a flame before dawn, watching the wick answer the draft that runs along these long corridors, perhaps stepping out to a marked stone where a gnomon once stood to catch the shortened noon. In some seasons, sunlight is a pilgrim with impeccable memory, finding again the same threshold, the same lintel, the same shallow groove, the same ledge cut to receive it. If there was a liturgy of the beam, it is lost, and yet the light still performs it, and those who know where to stand feel their pulse shift to its measure. Beyond the doorway, the moat brightens until it is almost white. He imagines the equinox dawn as others have described it, the disk rising from the far tree line, struck upon the lotus crown, the 5 towers multiplying upon the water until the reflection seems the truer form. Then, the familiar tune of the skeptics enters the mind's hearing, the caution that alignments can be found wherever longing is industrious, that a temple this large will always meet the sun somewhere, sometime, with convincing drama. He accepts the caution, and yet his bones answer that the line of this place is more than accident. Angkor's westward face is not a shrug at custom. It is a doctrine in stone. The fringe stories refuse silence today. One tells that Suryavarman dreamed a stair of light descending to the plain, and that Vishnu placed his foot upon it, leaving a burn the builders traced into the first axis. Another claims Indra himself drew the plan upon the ground during a rain that lasted 3 days, and that every place his drop stood without sliding was cut into the paving for eternity. In a thicket behind the North Library, there is a stone with a natural bowl that fills at the first storm of the wet season. Mothers bring their infants to wash their foreheads there, so they will remember the straight way. And if a child's life grows crooked, the old say the bowl was not properly filled. The tales do not persuade the sun persuades the tales to keep precise. He climbs the eastern stair of the 3rd gallery, slow and upright, the steps tall as a vow. From here the line clarifies. The central sanctuary sits upon its island of height like a thought the earth has pushed upward. 4 porches open to the seasons, but the west remains the master key, the long vista, the invitation to the returning light. He thinks of the calendars hidden in lintels and reliefs, celestial chariots, lotus blooms in counts of 12 and 30, celestial dancers in rings that resemble the circling years. A scholar once suggested that the dimensions from moat to central shrine enumerate the ages of the world, and that to walk them is to walk the human allotment of time. Another counters that the human passion for arithmetic has no limit, and that beauty needs no ledger. Between them stands the temple, unsurprised. On the upper terrace, a faint breeze moves. It smells of rain that is undecided. He extends his hand and feels the air tilt as a cloud slides across the sun. For a breath, the tower's shadow narrows and lengthens into a spear-thin thread that runs the spine of the causeway to the gate. If a priest once stood at the threshold to read that thread as an omen, the city would have listened. If a king placed his sandals on the shadow and let it lead him forward, perhaps his heartbeat learned the secret stanza the axis sings. Here, the stone repeats its oldest catechism without words, as above, so below. The quincunx recalls Meru's peaks. The moat becomes the encircling sea. The galleries are the continents stitched to the mountain's foot. To claim these correspondences as mere metaphor is to miss the tone of devotion. To claim them as proof of God's moving stones by night is to mishear the human hand. The temple loves a middle sentence. Men made it to host a sky, and the sky accepted the invitation. He lingers until the light goes blunt with noon. Lizards drowse upon the steps, and the air hums with a patient, stitched music of insects and distant water. At last, he descends the western stair, letting his palm skim the railing worn to satin by the passage of uncounted hands. The line follows him even where he cannot see it, like a taut string tied to his chest. The sight of the moat steadies him. The towers lean upon their reflections until the joint between worlds becomes a seam of bright thread. Before he leaves, he looks once more along the full breadth of the axis, from gate to tower to gate again, and feels the old certainty and the old question stand up together. The certainty is that minds and backs aligned to bring heaven down by plan. The question is whether plan alone suffices to explain the way light and water and stone agree here upon a grammar that feels native to the body, as if the temple remembered the shape of those who would come and taught the day how to greet them. Historians still argue whether the builders intended an observatory or a throne. He chooses a third word as he steps back onto the causeway: instrument. He leaves the axis behind, turning into the shaded cloisters where stone breathes cool from centuries of shadow. The sound changes here. The moat's murmur falls away, replaced by the hollow hush of enclosed space, the occasional wing-beat of a bat, and the faint patter of lizards darting over sandstone. The walls are dense with carvings, each panel a tide of figures frozen mid-step, mid-flight, mid-battle. If the outer causeway felt like the temple's voice speaking to the sky, this inner gallery feels like a whisper, meant for those who have crossed a threshold. Here, along the southern wall, stretches one of Angkor Wat's proudest achievements, the bas-reliefs of the churning of the ocean of milk. It's a historical fact told in sandstone, devas and asuras, gods and demons, straining at the serpent Vasuki wound around Mount Mandara, turning it into the churning stick that will bring forth Amrita, the nectar of immortality. The detail is extraordinary. Muscles ripple under stone skin, crowns catch carved wind, and 1,000 hands grip the serpent's body in tense harmony and discord. This is not decoration. It is narrative at a monumental scale, running hundreds of feet, each inch cut by hands that knew myth as intimately as craft. Some say this scene is more than a story from the Mahabharata. They claim it is a memory of a real event, a time when the Khmer ancestors, or those who came before, witnessed a cosmic convulsion that the tale only veils. In this fringe telling, the ocean is the celestial sphere, the mountain a great pillar of fire from the sky, and the serpent the arc of a comet whose passing stirred the heavens and reset the measures of life. The temple, they argue, is not merely a place to honor gods, but a record of the time when heaven and earth struck a bargain anew. He runs his fingers over the serpent's coils, feeling the indentations worn smooth by countless hands. In the stillness, it's easy to believe the naga might flex again, that the carved waves might swell and lap at the gallery floor. The light from the open corridor slants across the figures, casting deep shadows in eye sockets and under raised arms, so that for a heartbeat, the wall feels alive. What strikes him is how these bas-reliefs are not random. They face specific directions, some toward sunrise, others toward sunset, as if light itself was meant to join the story at certain hours. Historians still argue whether this alignment was intentional liturgy or simply the happy coincidence of a grand design. Some see in it a cosmic timetable, the churning scene lit at a season of harvest, the battle of Kurukshetra catching the dying light at the year's end, binding myth to the agricultural cycle. Farther along, he comes to the depiction of Suryavarman the Senu, the god-king whose vision birthed Angkor Wat. He is seated on a dais, attendants fanning him, courtiers and generals arrayed in disciplined ranks. The historical certainty here is solid. This king reigned from the early to mid-12th century, expanded the empire's reach, and ordered the construction of this temple not only as a home for Vishnu, but as his own mausoleum. Yet, even in the midst of stone certainty, stories wander. Some say the king was more than mortal, that he bore the mark of divine ancestry, his bloodline touched by celestial visitors. Others, more skeptical yet equally romantic, whisper that his rule was so absolute it blurred into myth, his image on the wall as much a god as a man. The gallery tightens into a corner where the stone is darker, polished by weather and hands. He pauses before a frieze of apsaras, celestial dancers, each one distinct in pose, ornament, and gaze. Over 500 of these figures are scattered throughout Angkor Wat, each wearing a unique headdress, each frozen mid-movement as if the next note of their music could summon them down from the walls. Apsaras belong to both history and myth. They are dancers of the court, symbols of divine beauty, and messengers between worlds. Local lore says that if one gazes long enough at a favorite apsara, she will step down from the stone in the quiet hours before dawn to dance for the viewer. Though, of course, such gifts are said to come only once in a lifetime. In the muted light, he imagines the gallery alive, the churners pulling in unison, the king receiving tribute, apsaras spinning in slow arcs, anklets chiming. The carvings become not simply art, but memory etched into the walls, intended to be read by feet and eyes moving slowly along the corridors. He thinks of the artisans themselves, hundreds, perhaps thousands of sculptors, each committed to a detail that would outlive them by centuries. No names are signed here. Their legacy is the temple itself. The air thickens with the smell of incense from a nearby shrine. Ahead, an elderly woman sits cross-legged before a small altar, arranging marigolds and lighting thin sticks that trail smoke like silver threads. She nods toward the bas-reliefs, as if to say the stories are still awake, still listening. He wonders how many offerings have been laid here, how many prayers murmured in the shadow of these walls, hoping the gods or the stone would hear. In a nearby alcove, a monk in saffron robes sweeps the floor, his broom making a rhythmic rasp against the stone. The fringe of his robe brushes the carved feet of a warrior mid-stride. The juxtaposition is startling. The living tending to the frozen, the present moment brushing against the eternal. From somewhere beyond the gallery, a bell rings, once, twice, and he feels the pull to follow. But he lingers, because here in this hall, history, myth, and living devotion braid together. The carvings are more than a record. They are a conversation across centuries. The gods strain at their serpent, the king surveys his court, the dancers lean toward an unheard melody, and he, an intruder from another age, finds himself caught in their rhythm. He steps back into the light, blinking, the outer courtyard stretching before him. The sky is high and unbroken, the towers sharp against it. The heat presses close again, but he carries the cool breath of the gallery with him, as though the stone has lent him a fragment of its patience. Behind him, the reliefs return to stillness, their stories locked once more in the grain of the sandstone, waiting for the next set of eyes to draw them back into motion. He comes again to the rim of water, immense, deliberate, ringed with embankments as straight as a ruler laid against the earth. The moat of Angkor Wat gathers the sky into itself, a black-green mirror that swallows the towers whole and returns them upside down, lotus crowns drifting beneath lilies. In the heat of noon it looks motionless, but a subtle draw runs along it, a breath pulled toward sluice and spillway, proof that this is not a pool but a tethered river, a road of water taught to move in circles. From the western gate, he follows the laterite parapet, rough blocks sun-warmed and iron-red, each stone a weight shouldered from a quarry and set until the line did not waver. Palms stand in procession along the inner bank, their fronds sounding like rain though the sky is bright. At intervals, steps descend into the water, worn concave by centuries of feet, officials washing dust from sandals, pilgrims cupping the mirror to cool their mouths, young novices scooping water for lotus offerings. The air smells of wet stone and leaf, of silt that remembers mountains. The scale is a sentence, nearly 200 meters from bank to bank, a rectangle more than a kilometer long and just shy of that in width, its corners squared like a scribal margin. A historical fact steadies the wonder. The moat is not merely icon but engineering. It buttresses the sandy subsoil, keeps the temple's weight from sinking by holding groundwater steady, anchors the causeway piers in a balanced table of pressures. It belongs to the larger hydraulic grammar of Angkor, berets like inland seas, canals that stitched reservoirs to fields, spillways and gates that taught seasons to arrive by appointment. Here, empire thought in water. Yet the moat's meaning refuses to remain technical. The villagers say it is the cosmic ocean made visible, channeled into earthly obedience so that Meru could sit upon it without drowning. They say 7-headed Nagas coil beneath the lilies, uncoiling when lightning counts a certain number of heartbeats between strikes. That crocodiles in the old days were not beasts but guardians loaned by the underworld, strolling the surface invisibly, snorting at those who spoke too loudly at dusk. A woman once told him the water never truly dries, because a spring beneath the central tower pulses up through the earth and finds its way here, a vein from heaven's own lake. He looks at the sun-glazed skin and cannot prove her wrong. Where the great sandstone causeway runs straight over the moat, the world narrows to a test. To step onto it is to cross a sentence laid in stone. This side, human. That side, something else. The Naga balustrades tense along its margins, bodies carved into endless scales, heads fanned and fanged, their mouths blooming at the bridgeheads like guardians who have chosen amiability over mercy. Children once learned on nights of festival that you must not count the Naga's scales. The number heard in the mind is the measure of your remaining years. He keeps his palms to the rail and lets the carvings keep their arithmetic. Wind moves and the water answers with ripples smudging the inverted towers. For a breath, the temple looks like a picture trembling in a storyteller's hand. He recalls an old inscription that likened Angkor to a vessel set upon the sea, and another that promised the king's soul would cross upon it as on a road to the middle of the sky. The moat lends the promise body. It is the margin between the city's grammar of trade and law and the temple's older speech. Imitation becomes presence, symbol becomes crossing. He kneels where the embankment flares into a landing and studies the masonry of the inner bank. Sandstone blocks trimmed true, their joints thin as lines of script. Below them, laterite squaring the slope, pocked and dark like baked bread. In a dry season, crews must have scraped weeds and silt, keeping the face clean for the temple's reflection to write upon. He imagines men in single file with woven baskets, passing mud up the steps in strokes of patient choreography, returning the margin to clarity. Historians still argue whether such maintenance was constant duty or seasonal pageant, whether the temple consumed a peacetime army of hands to remain itself, or whether the broad hydraulic system eased the labor by design. In the dispute, the water keeps its own counsel. A monk in saffron steps lightly along the inner bank, his robe a small sun, his bowl empty and undemanding. He pauses, sets the bowl beside him, and, with a ladle, flicks 3 bright drops into the moat, one for the builders, one for the carvers, one for the nameless who hauled. The drops widen into rings that touch the lilies and vanish. The act is ordinary and mythic at once, a ritual no tablet recorded and no chronicle refuses. Water receives everything and confesses nothing. Perhaps that is why it is first to be honored. Night recollections stray here in the noon glare. There are stories of torches moving in lines along the causeway, of processions that transformed the bridge into the spine of a dragon, of musicians setting their drums to the cadence of oar strokes so the mirrored towers would seem to nod. On nights of equinox, Pilgrims still stand at the causeway's middle and watch the dawn climb the central tower and paint the moat with light the color of saffron, as if the temple bled sunrise into its own sea. Some claim they have seen stars pierce the water and travel beneath the stone, reappearing at the far bank with no diminution. Skeptics answer with reflections and angles, and do held just so, and are not wrong. Still, the moat tolerates both vocabularies with the leisure of something older than argument. He steps down until his sandals drink the shallow verge. Small fish scatter like quick thoughts. A dragonfly poses on a blade of grass, an arrow tipped with vitreous green. Across the water, children's laughter circles. Somewhere a woodpecker writes small messages into a palm. In the near silence, the moat's sound reveals itself, not a hush, not a stillness, but a continuous woven murmur, the almost inaudible tick of shore against stone, the minute clink of lily stems rubbing, the breath of water sliding by its own edges. For those who served here, that sound was likely the temple's lowest chant, a ground note across which bells and conches in prayer would rise. He walks on, following the parapet to the northwest corner where a spillway mouths the inner sea. There, stone teeth regulate the outflow into the shadowed channel, and he sees that the moat is not simply a ring but a conversation with the plain beyond. Sluice and weir, gate and culvert, words in later languages for ancient intentions, determine how the temple's ocean greets the rice fields, how water returns from symbol to bread. A scholar has argued that Angkor Wat was built not at the city's center but at its hinge, where the sacred meets the administrative. Another counters that the temple is itself a city, complete with reservoirs and leveled courts. The moat resides at the crux of their debate, smiling with its lipless curve. Fringe beliefs bloom near the spillway like lotuses. One tells that the crocodiles who once patrolled here were not fed scraps but names. Villagers whispered the syllables of illnesses into the water, and the beasts carried them away into the dark. Another claims the moat's level rises when the gods are insulted, even in seasons of drought, and lowers when a vow is kept. The old say you can test a promise by watching for the small line of wetness left on stone after sunset. If the line recedes overnight, the vow has been accepted. He has watched, and the line has moved. Because wind kissed the surface, or because vows have weight, the moat recommends humility in interpretation. Near the western gate again, he pauses where the causeway lifts him above the surface like a thought kept from drowning. The sun has crossed enough for shadows to soften. The towers in the water look less like architecture, and more like jars of ink spilled without waste. He thinks of the builders designing this margin, deciding how wide the world must be kept from the holy, and how to fashion a bridge that does not abolish difference, but teaches the foot to notice it. The moat becomes the temple's first word, spoken before stone can speak. Separate, not to exclude, but to name. Cross, not to conquer, but to consent. A breeze lifts, carrying the smell of rain from far fields. The water shivers and makes of the towers 1,000 trembling petals. He watches the image break and reform, a lesson in endurance finer than any inscription. Historians still argue whether the moat was built foremost as defense, hydrology, or symbol, whether its crocodiles protected or its sluices saved, whether its reflection was an aesthetic accident or an essential doctrine. He lets the questions stand on their banks and looks into the water where sky becomes story. In that offered mirror, men and gods are less enemies than partners. One sets the stone, the other agrees to look back. He crosses to the inner shore once more, and the noise of the outer world falls away as if the water absorbs it. The Naga's stone body runs beneath his fingers, cool and faintly damp. Beyond, the galleries darken into patience, and the towers lift, untroubled by which face is above and which below. The moat, having made the introductions, watches him go and keeps the threshold unbroken. He moves along the shadowed gallery now, where the air feels heavier and cooler, as if the stone itself exhales a slow, ancient breath. Before him stretches the first of the great bas-reliefs, walls turned into rivers of carved narrative, their currents flowing in figures and faces, in spears and chariots, in endless folds of celestial scarves. At this hour, the light slides across them at a shallow angle, catching edges so that spears seem sharper, eyes more alert, and elephants more massive than stone should allow. The gallery smells of dust and faint incense. the kind that clings long after a pilgrim's offering has gone cold. It is here, in these walls, that the Khmer spoke their longest sentences, ones you don't read left to right, but along a tide of bodies and battles, gods and kings. A historical fact sits plainly enough in this hall. These reliefs are the largest known continuous bas-reliefs in the world, stretching nearly half a kilometer in total, carved in the 12th century under King Suryavarman II. They tell not only of the Hindu epics, the Ramayana and Mahabharata, but also of real historical events like Suryavarman's military campaigns. He follows the famous churning of the Ocean of Milk panel, where gods and demons line up like two tug-of-war teams on the coils of the great serpent Vasuki. In the center, Vishnu steadies himself, calm amid chaos, while below him the ocean teems with fish, turtles, and divine creatures. The relief is a freeze frame of myth, but you can almost hear the grunt of effort, the groan of the serpent, the rush of cosmic waters. Here is where history blends into fringe belief. The Khmer saw themselves as heirs to this celestial labor, the maintainers of cosmic order through earthly engineering. Just as the gods churned the ocean to release Amrita, the nectar of immortality, so the Khmer churned their land with canals and moats to release life from the caprice of monsoon. He notices the faces of the asuras, demons, carved with fierce concentration, their eyes narrowed, their bodies taut. Their hands grip the Naga's body with a mix of desperation and determination. The devas, gods, are no less strained, their celestial jewelry bouncing against their chests. Historians still argue whether these figures were meant purely as Hindu allegory or as coded portraits of court factions, generals, or even subject peoples. Some claim the asuras bear features of enemy states, while others insist the division is spiritual, not political. The relief does not correct them, it simply holds its breath in stone. Further along, a massive battle scene unfolds, rows upon rows of warriors, each given enough individuality to suggest that even in an army, no two lives march the same. Elephants stride forward, their riders poised with spears. Archers draw their bows in unison, horses rear, mouths open in silent whinnies. The sheer density of figures feels impossible, as though the carvers were paid not by the meter, but by the soul. The wall is a crowd frozen mid-roar. He leans close to one corner where a soldier has been carved smaller than the rest, crouched behind a fallen comrade. His shield is raised, his face turned as though waiting for a signal that never came. This is the detail that pulls him in, not the kings or generals, but this anonymous moment of human hesitation immortalized by hands that would never meet him. Was it an artistic flourish, or did the carver know such fear firsthand? Moving deeper, he finds celestial dancers, the apsaras, floating above the battle's smoke. Their bodies curve in impossible grace, fingers poised in the intricate mudras of divine performance. Their faces are serene, untouched by the chaos below. It is said that apsaras could charm both gods and mortals, and that their dance was the very pattern of creation's heartbeat. Some Khmer elders still believe that on certain nights, if moonlight strikes the walls just so, the apsaras step free and dance through the galleries, leaving damp footprints on the sandstone floor. He runs his fingers gently along a worn figure, feeling the softened grooves where thousands of other fingers have traced before. The tactile memory is almost as strong as the visual. Every line carved by chisel is also a line carved by touch. The stone has been read like Braille by centuries. There's a part of the gallery where the relief shifts from the mythic to the mundane. Rows of attendants carrying offerings, baskets of fruit, jars of water, trays of flowers. Here, history insists on its place. This is not just a monument to gods and kings, but also to the people who sustain them. You can almost hear the shuffle of bare feet, the creak of wicker, the soft clink of pottery. He catches himself smiling at a small, carved monkey perched on the edge of a chariot, its tail curling like a question mark. It is moments like these that make the place feel alive. These mischievous insertions, perhaps jokes left by the carvers for anyone patient enough to look. It's easy to imagine them laughing, stone dust in their hair as they added one more secret to the temple's skin. Near the end of the gallery, the battle ebbs into scenes of victory. Kings enthroned beneath parasols, courtiers lined up like punctuation, servants fanning the air. The symmetry is deliberate, chaos resolved into order, struggle giving way to rule. Yet even here, in the carved stillness of triumph, a subtle unease lingers. Historians still debate whether these images reflect actual victories or idealized propaganda. Was the temple a record, or was it a wish? The stone offers no verdict. As he steps out into the open courtyard again, the sunlight feels harsher after the gallery's half-light. The bas-reliefs remain behind him, still whispering their layered stories of gods who churn oceans, of kings who rule through both sword and irrigation, of dancers who smile through eternity. He knows he will carry the weight of their silence forward, because silence here is not emptiness. It is a ledger of what endures when all else collapses. He steps into the great courtyard where the air widens and the temple's heart beats in the open sky. The stone beneath his feet radiates stored heat, a slow exhalation from the morning sun, and somewhere in the height above, a bird calls, its note sharp against the vast quiet. Before him, the towers rise, not as mere architecture, but as mountains in miniature, each tiered like the layers of a sacred cosmology. Here stands the central quincunx, 5 towers arranged like the dots on a die, the tallest at the center. Historically, these towers are a masterstroke of Khmer engineering, symbolizing Mount Meru, the cosmic axis of Hindu and Buddhist belief. In legend, Mount Meru is surrounded by oceans, its slopes the domain of gods, its summit touching the heavens. The towers of Angkor are not content to represent this, they become it. From certain angles, especially in the gold of late afternoon, the towers appear impossibly high, their spires dissolving into the cloudlight, as if to insist they've pierced another realm. He circles the base of the central tower, tracing his gaze along the tiers that narrow upward. The sandstone blocks, each weighing several tons, fit together without mortar. Historians still argue whether the sheer scale of this construction could have been achieved solely with wooden scaffolding, pulleys, and manpower, or if, as some fringe theories claim, there was an ancient technique long forgotten, one that allowed these stones to be moved with a precision and speed modern engineers find unnerving. The Khmer themselves credited divine favor. If gods desired a palace on earth, they would ensure its building was swift. The tower is studded with false doors, beautifully carved entrances that open onto nothing but solid stone. They are framed with lintels of dancing apsaras, swirling floral patterns, and guardians with fierce bulging eyes. The false doors are more than decoration. They are thresholds for spirits, the invisible court that moves parallel to the living. Fringe beliefs in rural Cambodia still hold that at certain festivals, the spirits enter through these carved portals to walk among the people, tasting their offerings before retreating into the stone. He finds a staircase to the upper terrace, its steps steep and narrow, demanding a bow from anyone who climbs, a posture of humility before entering the celestial precinct. The climb pulls at his legs, the kind that leaves you breathless halfway up, but the view compels him onward. When he reaches the terrace, the world tilts outward. From here, the galleries and courtyards below look like the ordered rings of a giant mandala, and beyond them, the green tide of jungle stretches to the horizon. The wind is different here, cleaner, more insistent, as though carrying messages from far away. The carvings are fewer at this height, but the stone has a different texture, worn smooth by centuries of sun and rain. It's easy to imagine a king standing here, robed and crowned, looking out over his domain and believing himself as close to the gods as any mortal could stand. At the base of the central spire, there's a chamber dimly lit by narrow windows. The walls bear traces of once bright murals, faded almost to invisibility, lotus blooms, guardian figures, and something that might be the faint outline of a celestial map. One historian argued it could be an astronomical chart, its points aligned with seasonal star patterns. Another dismissed it as decorative chants, and still others, those who lean toward the mythic, say it is a map not of the heavens above, but of the realms beyond death, a guide for the king's soul to ascend after the final breath. The chamber smells faintly of beeswax and incense, a ghost of offerings past. He kneels without quite knowing why, his hand brushing the cool stone floor. In the stillness, he feels the weight of the centuries here, as though every whispered prayer, every muttered oath, Every word of love or loss ever spoken in this space is layered in the air, soft as dust. Through one narrow slit of a window, the view frames a single palm tree, its fronds moving gently. That small motion in the distance feels oddly grounding, a reminder that life outside these walls moves on even as the temple holds its eternal pose. Descending again, he pauses midway to look back at the towers from a higher vantage. The symmetry is absolute, too perfect for accident, too harmonious for mere utility. The Khmer architects knew geometry not only as a science, but as a form of worship. The tower's reflections in the surrounding pools double their height, so that even a casual glance suggests they touch both sky and underworld. And there is that nagging mystery. Why build something so vast, so intricate, so consuming of human effort, if not to prove a point to gods or men? Historians still debate whether the temple scale was a political statement, a spiritual necessity, or simply an act of royal ego too large to fit within ordinary stone. Back at ground level, he walks along the causeway toward the outer edge of the complex. From this angle, the central towers cluster together like a crown, their spires lit by shifting sun. The whole temple seems less like a building and more like a vision, something glimpsed between sleep and waking. A place you half expect to dissolve if you look too long. The air tastes faintly metallic, as if the stone itself has an aftertaste. And somewhere in the distance, a low roll of thunder begins, the kind that seems to resonate inside your chest. He wonders if it will rain. Angkor in the rain is said to take on another face entirely, a place where the carvings weep and the moats drink greedily, where the stone darkens and smells of earth, and the gods, if they watch through curtains of silver. He lingers for a last look at the central towers. In the shifting light, their outlines blur, and for a moment he can almost believe the old stories, that these are not towers at all, but the peaks of another world, momentarily visible before the veil closes again. He enters a long, dim corridor where light moves as if it has learned to whisper. The ceiling lowers into a stone barrel, its curve so true that footsteps return as a second traveler, walking just behind. He pauses and breathes. The breath comes back, ghosted, delayed, softened as if stroked by an unseen hand. Here, Angkor keeps a different archive, not images cut into walls, but syllables pressed into air, released only when someone dares to speak. He tests the silence with a palm against the pillar. The sandstone is warm where the sun has grazed it, cool in the seams where shadow collects. He makes a single, careful sound, the heel of his hand on stone, no harder than a polite knock. At once, the gallery answers with a cascade, one strike multiplied into a string of silvered echoes, each echo slightly higher than the last, as though the temple tuned the note into a brief, ascending chant. Pilgrims once called this the voice of the Apsaras, the hall that sings. Guides still show children how to clap here and listen for the temple's reply. The trick is not magic, and yet it is. A historical fact anchors the marvel. These corridors, hundreds of meters long, are rimmed by continuous vaulted roofs, their stones laid in corbelled courses that pinch sound into the middle, then carry it until a breath can travel farther than its body. In some bays, the walls are set with shallow niches. Between them, the stone ribs make a rhythm that can catch a low voice and roll it forward like water along parallel banks. Offer a chant in one corner, and it may arrive a dozen paces away as a companion, softened, braided with a hush that does not come from any mouth. He moves to a side chamber whose doorway is plain but steeped in soot polish, the kind of gloss only centuries of shoulders can make. Inside, a small Buddha sits upon a simple altar. Before it, a hollow in the floor has been rubbed to a shallow bowl. He kneels at the threshold and murmurs a single line, half prayer, half poem, more breath than word. The room lifts it, rounds it, gives it back. The sound is not louder, only fuller, as if the walls have supplied vowels where his lungs were poor and added a thread of bronze to a mere reed. The elders of the nearby villages keep older names for these places: the Hall of Echoes, the Chamber of Two Mouths, the Room of Answering Stone. They tell that in the days of the king, priests would walk the galleries at dawn, striking their palms or a wooden clapper at a fixed interval. If the temple answered bright and quick, the day was auspicious. If the reply stumbled or dulled, gates stayed closed and offerings were doubled. A fringe belief holds that the resonance is not solely the labor of shape and stone. The towers are said to be capillaries of the sky, and when certain stars stand over the central spire, the galleries fill with a second kind of wind that braids human speech with voices not entirely human. Those who cherish this tale bring conch shells to the causeway, blow once toward the towers, and listen for an answer that threads the trees. He rises and continues. Around a turn, the corridor bends and narrows. At a precise place, it widens by the measure of a man. A line of square pillars takes up the rhythm, and between them the air seems to stretch like gut on a lute. He sets his back to the stone and sings one true note, not loud, not long. It hangs like a jar held in careful fingers. Then it moves, forward, away, returning with a pale twin in its arms. He imagines a procession here, the sound of a single conch beginning on the western steps, passing inward to the second enclosure, the horn's cry braided by the galleries, until the central sanctuary meets it not as noise, but as an arriving guest. He is not the only listener. A monk stands in shadow with his bowl against his hip, eyes lowered. He raises two fingers and taps them gently against the bowl's rim. The bell is small and the tone modest. The gallery lifts it into three. The monk's mouth does not smile, but the corners know what has happened. The bowl returns to his hip. He turns and goes. Ritual, here, is sometimes no more than granting stone the courtesy of a voice. No one agrees why Angkor speaks this way. Some scholars argue that the gallery's resonance is an accident of excellence, the inevitable companion to long corbelled passageways and smooth parallel walls. Others insist there is aim within the reverberation. Certain bays swell male voices, others cradle the higher tones of women. Some positions near side doors, marked by apparently trivial pillars, send sound skimming like a thrown leaf all the way to an answering corner where a priest might have stood. Historians still debate whether these features were tuned by trial or by a rule of thumb lost with the Masons, or whether pattern alone seduces meaning from chance. He steps into an open cross where four aisles kiss. The air there is different, thin as a blade. He breathes, and the breath returns in four pieces, then recombines just behind his head. If prayer were water, this is the basin into which the four canals pour. He pictures a king once standing exactly here, the court at the four ends of the world, the priest at the center, to speak a single promise that would reach all corners at once. No inscription testifies. The acoustics themselves are the rumor and the record. Along the inner wall, a row of devata, solemn female guardians, regard the passer-by, their faces oval and calm, their jewelry minute as a map of stars. He addresses one with a few quiet syllables for respect. The devata does not move, but he hears a soft counterfeit of his voice slip back from the next pillar and falter, as if it were shy. The old women say that to receive such an echo is to have been heard, and to walk on is to be permitted. Those who receive nothing stand their ground and wait until it comes. If it never comes, they come back another day. He remembers another chamber, the one beneath the central tower, where a short gallery ends against a fitted block, and the far end is closed. In that blind throat, a deep note will throb and return, ascending in quick steps like rungs tackled in haste. Pilgrims lean their foreheads to the wall there and hum until the stone answers. Children laugh. The old grow thoughtful, as if the tower above has stirred a memory in the rock and in the bones. Some claim this is the breath of Vishnu asleep and smiling. Others say it is the tower remembering the weight of 1,000 dawns. A mason, were he here, might say, a barrel-shaped ceiling and a smooth floor do this, the rest is your heart. Light changes as clouds pass, shadows slide along the ribs, the stone's voice lowers and lifts as if it too were subject to weather. He imagines the monsoon when rain lace hangs at each opening and the galleries speak in glassy whispers. The dry season when dust underfoot gives the echoes a faint velvet. The temple's acoustics are not constant, they are an instrument with seasons for strings. Beyond the cloister, he enters a court where a shallow cistern holds a patient square of sky. Here, there is no voice, only the faintest of responses, a breath upon a breath. It is a relief. One cannot be answered constantly without forgetting what it is to ask. He kneels by the water and watches a dragonfly stitch a brief invisible embroidery with its wings. Even that minute sound comes back, multiplied until it resembles distant silk. He cups his hands, wets his lips, and tastes the stone that has flavored the water for 9 centuries, the iron of its patience, the lime of its fatigue. When he returns to the gallery, a faint line of music floats from farther within, perhaps a chant from a monk, perhaps a hymn from visiting laypeople. It is simple, 3 notes in a step, no more than a child might carry. The corridor catches it, braids it, offers it forward. Now 1, now 2, now a shimmering companion that never quite matches but never quite leaves. The sound leads him, not as a leash but as a lantern. At the last bend, he stands where the shade ends and noon waits. Behind him the temple has spoken in the only voice stone owns, borrowed breath made round and returned. Before him the towers have no sound at all, and yet the air about them hums, slight as the nerve that quickens under a wrist's skin. He considers the argument he has overheard even in modern days, that all this is accident refined by devotion, that all this is design disguised as accident, that all this is merely human and thus more miraculous for needing no other author. He lets the debate pass through him like wind through a window, and he steps forward with the answer Angkor always preferred. Listen again. He moves into the eastern quadrant, where light floods the flagstones as if poured from a tilted bowl. Here the air is brighter, more open, carrying the faint scent of dried lotus from nearby pools. The stone under his feet is worn into shallow dimples, polished depressions that mark the exact places where sandals stopped, where bare heels pivoted, century after century. He runs a finger along the edge of one and finds it smooth as river pebbles, though the temple stands far from any current. This is where feet, not water, have sculpted the earth. Against the sunlight, a causeway stretches forward like a ruler etched into the ground, dividing the world into 2 equal halves. To the left and right, long colonnades cast deep, steady shade. He steps into one. The first breath inside is cooler, laced with the scent of beeswax and incense long gone cold. At each pillar's base, faint carvings of lotus buds bloom upward, giving way to fluted shafts that rise like bundled reeds. They are not perfectly straight, some lean, some bow, but the imperfection lends the corridor a rhythm that catches the eye, like a melody allowed to skip once before returning to its pattern. A historical fact whispers beneath the beauty. The eastern approach was built for dawn. In equinox weeks, the first sunlight threads the colonnade exactly along its centerline, illuminating the innermost doorway in a narrow golden lance. No ruler's order remains to prove it, but alignment this precise is seldom a coincidence. Modern surveyors measure angles and chalk marks to explain it. Old guides simply say, "The gods walked here first." He imagines the scene centuries ago. Priests lining the colonnade, white robes glowing in the first light, each holding a garland of fresh flowers to cast at the sanctum's foot. The sound of conch shells would rise, and with it, the rustle of palm leaves tied into fans. In that glow, even stone must have seemed to breathe. Yet the eastward path carries another legend, a fringe belief whispered by elders, that this causeway was not built for men alone. It was, they say, the landing path for beings of the upper realms, serpent kings and celestial architects, who descended in boats of light that touched stone without leaving a mark. The long stretch of smooth flagstone, they claim, is not just a walkway, but a mirror meant for the sky to see itself. The carvings along this stretch speak in pictures rather than letters. One panel shows a god wrestling with a demon, their limbs tangled like vines, neither winning, neither falling. Another depicts a figure with human body but a head crowned in 7 serpent hoods, arms outstretched as if blessing or claiming the land. He pauses at that one. The naga-headed figure has eyes set not on the foe before it, but slightly upward, at something beyond the panel's border. It's a small choice in carving, but it pulls the gaze toward an unseen horizon. He steps out into the open again. The courtyard here is paved with massive stones, each cut so tightly to its neighbor that weeds have no home. Near the center, a lotus pool mirrors the sky, its surface dappled by petals fallen from trees just beyond the wall. In the heat shimmer, the towers beyond the pool waver slightly, as if deciding whether to stay in this world or slip into the next. An elderly caretaker tends the pool's edge, sweeping fallen petals into a wicker basket. She nods without words and gestures toward the water. He kneels, scoops some into his hand, and feels the temperature drop, a small relief in the midday heat. She tells him, in a voice like worn silk, that these pools once held more than water. In the old days, she says, they reflected the stars. He wonders if she means that literally. She insists that during certain nights of the dry season, the pool would shine with constellations that did not match the sky above, as if some other firmament had come to visit. Historians still argue whether this was an effect of oil lamps set at precise angles, or whether the tale is simply another layering of devotion over stone. A breeze stirs and sets the shadows moving. He walks on, following the causeway as it narrows toward a stepped platform. From here, the temple's symmetry reveals itself, doorways nested within doorways, each framing the next like the folds of a paper lantern. The sight is mesmerizing. The air between each archway is like a corridor of light, each layer more golden than the one before. He imagines a king standing here, watching his priests move through the gates, each step timed so the sun crowned their heads at the exact moment they entered the sanctum. There is a peculiar quiet here, broken only by the far-off cry of a bird and the faint clink of the caretaker's broom handle against stone. He closes his eyes and lets the warmth paint his eyelids orange. Somewhere, perhaps just behind him, the echo of the earlier galleries waits, patient, like a voice that knows it will be called again. Opening his eyes, he notices something in the paving, a single stone slightly darker than the rest. It's not larger, not carved differently, just a shade more shadowed even in direct light. Some say these odd stones are markers left by the original builders, denoting spots where treasures or offerings were buried. Others claim they are nothing more than replacements from later restorations, their different hue a byproduct of younger stone. But a third story persists, that these are the resting places of sacred tools, hidden deliberately so the temple's craft could never be replicated exactly. He places his palm on the stone and waits. The heat is deeper here, as if the sun has stored more hours in this one block. He stands again, uncertain whether he has touched history, legend, or just a darker stone in the glare of noon. But that uncertainty is the temple's oldest game, to keep him moving, asking, wondering. Beyond the platform, steps descend into another shaded colonnade. The temperature shifts immediately, the air touched by a cool draft flowing from the sanctum's direction. It feels like a slow inhale from the temple itself, an invitation to come closer. And so he does. Storm comes like a withheld breath released. He stands at the edge of the eastern court when the first drops strike, broad coins flung from a darkening sky. The lotus pools shiver, the towers lose their edges and become bruised silhouettes. Wind threads the colonnades, and the long galleries answer with a low, continuous moan, as if the stone remembers the grammar of weather better than men do. Sheets of rain sweep across the moat, flattening ripples into hammered silver, and the nagas along the balustrades gleam as though new scales have been laid upon their backs. In the thunder's voice, he hears another pulse. Boots, drums, the dull persuasion of siege. History moves in behind the monsoon, the Cham raid that burned the river and tore Angkor's breath in the late 12th century. Later, the Siamese marches that press toward the heart, the slow attrition of border and tribute, levy and loss. A historical fact stands amid this storm of rumor and echo. In 1431, armies from Ayutthaya entered Angkor. The capital unraveled, power shifted, and the city's great reservoirs tilted into neglect. Yet here, Angkor Wat endures. Even as royal banners change, the temple remains a monastery, its sanctuaries tended by saffron and ash, its steps swept by those who call the Buddha's name. Cities fall, this mountain of stone remembers how to kneel. Half sheltered beneath a lintel, he watches rain trace the faces of apsaras until they seem to weep. Black striations stain certain panels, a smoke shadow from long ago fires. Under a veranda, a relief bears rough gouges where a chisel dug out a set of eyes, then stopped, indecisive. Was it iconoclasm or fear? A soldier's knife? A pilgrim's superstition? A monk's attempt to quiet a spirit too restless? No one can say. Historians still argue whether the devastating changes at Angkor came chiefly by sword or by sky. Droughts that stretched like tightened strings, then floods that undid the stitching. Canals that silted and clogged, a hydraulic city aging into rigidity while trade routes swung their hips toward the coast. The arguments stack like monsoon clouds, heavy with data and unshed rain. Lightning lays a ladder down the western horizon. For a moment the towers stand caught in white. It is here the elders whisper other accounts, the fringe that refuses to die. The naga beneath the moat uncoiled when the enemy came, and the water rose at a gesture no man could see. Apsaras stepped from the walls at midnight and whirled through campfires until the flames burned inward and devoured their own smoke. A great voice at the center prasat spoke once in the storm, and men fled with their hands over their ears, though no word was given. These are not footnotes, they are lamps carried for comfort along dark corridors of memory. He lets them burn and does not ask them to prove themselves. He moves as the rain slackens, crossing a court where the paving has bowed like a tired back. On the far side, a doorway leads into a chamber spent to shadow. Inside, the air is sour with old soot, sweet with wax, centuries of prayer distilled into a perfume that clings to the lungs. A small Buddha sits upon a rough altar. Around him, faint murals bloom and fade, lotus, wheel, flames painted with a brush that has slept more than it woke. In this room, the lines of empire are erased. Only the cycle of devotion remains. The temple's dedication shifts from Vishnu's radiant axis to the stillness of the enlightened one. Yet the stone is not offended. Angkor Wat bows to a new light and keeps its vow, to be a place where sky and breath acknowledge one another. He steps back into open air and follows the causeway toward the western gate, where battles once crossed and processions later returned. You can see siege if you choose to look for it, chipped corners where wheels slammed and broke, fissures like healed wounds along the parapet, the blunt shine on steps where hurried feet took the same line again and again. Beyond the gate, the outer field lies heavy with rain. He imagines campfires guttering, horses blowing steam, banners plastered to their poles. In the galleries, he imagines monks reciting through the long nights, one voice passing to the next, a rope thrown from hour to hour. There are seasons when silence is enemy, and seasons when silence is bread. After the armies, after the court's last long caravan pulls south, after the scribes fold their tablets like wings and fly from the city's throat, the jungle begins to rehearse possession. Roots probe seams, a fig's tender finger becomes a fist, and then a forearm. Dust loosens into soil and invites seeds to test their courage. But Angkor Wat is stubborn. Its moat holds the water table steady, its terraces shed the worst of the clutching vines. Monks clip and sweep, chant and repair. Travelers later will write that Angkor was abandoned. It was not. The palace of kings wandered, this monastery endured. Still, narratives of loss press at the edges. The berets dull to tarnish, spillways collapse into teeth. The great city's neighborhoods drift from planning to happenstance, then to forest. He kneels by a threshold and sets his palm to a stone, warm from rain. The heat is a pulse. He thinks of tree-ring stories from far mountains, megadroughts and unseasonal deluge, of canals silted shallow, of rice whose timetable would not be argued with, of engineers who cut new channels until the map became a palimpsest of hope. Historians still argue whether Angkor's water machine failed of its own success, too grand to flex, or whether human hands let it go limp while sovereignty and trade moved elsewhere. The temple keeps its counsel, its answer is survival. Even in decline, ceremonies proceed. He can almost see a torchlit procession during a late century, monks pacing the causeway, conches low, a saffron line stitched against jungle black. Rain beads upon shaved heads, wax runs in amber tears. The great towers are ink black against a sky without moon. They circle the central shrine, leave offerings, scrape weeds from the first steps, small obediences against vast forces. If the gods of empire have ridden on, the god of the quiet mind has taken the empty seat and asks for little. Sweep, light, bow, breathe. At the moat, the rain's last skin lies unbroken. A frog makes the first syllable of evening. He looks across the water and imagines a line of soldiers on the far bank lowering their spears, not in surrender, but in confusion. because the city they were sent to take has already exhaled and become a forest of thought. There is nothing to conquer that does not require tending. The temple has redefined victory. Endurance has the last word. He turns back toward the galleries and passes a panel where a king once rode beneath parasols. The parasols are still. The king's face is dulled by weather and touch. Below him, a small figure, no god, no general, lifts a tray of fruit. The tray remains round and whole, the offering fresh in the stubborn permanence of stone. He stands before it longer than he planned. The empires argue, the climate turns, the flood and drought rehearse their rivalries, and a single tray of fruit continues upward, hands steady. Twilight gathers without spectacle. Bats sketch their brief sentences along the ribs of the corridors. The monk's bell speaks once, a bronze punctuation somewhere inside the maze, and the galleries accept the period and begin to dream their next paragraph. On the causeway, water lifts and sets its own invisible shoulder, shipping the day away. He stops at the western gate and looks back. The towers stack into the last light like vows you can still hear being made. Myth says the temple glows of its own will when danger nears, a soft gold that misleads enemies into walking circles until their anger forgets its name. Skeptics count footpaths and angles. Believers count saved winters. He counts breath, one, another, another. In that simple arithmetic, he understands how this place passed through siege and silence, not by refusing the world, but by outlasting its weather. Night returns on green feet. He walks beneath palm and strangler fig, where roots descend like ropes thrown from a besieged sky, and the breath of leaves smells of rain held in 1,000 small fists. Vines slide over balustrades with a thief's patience. Lianas test the joints between stones the way fingers test the seams of a book. The towers recede into a canopy that does not care about vows, and the galleries go dim beneath a quilt of moss. After storm and siege, the jungle does what empires do not, persist without intention, until Angkor's edges blur into a single vast syllable of green. He follows a path that is not a path so much as the memory of one, a causeway narrowed to 2 dry stones, a naga balustrade whose scales have become islands for ferns. The moat is black glass, its mirror cracked where fallen fronds rest like lashes across an eye. Cicadas lay down their iron chorus. Fruit bats pass like slow, soft oars. Somewhere a palm civet picks its way along a ledge, stopping to sniff the old soot of a shrine. Men have written long about conquest. The forest writes longer with leaf and humidity. A historical truth persists even here, under the vines. Angkor Wat does not go empty. Through centuries of upheaval, the temple remains a monastery. Saffron threads still stitch morning to evening. Lamps burn in inner rooms. Pilgrims come by boat or foot with flowers and quiet imperatives. The great city around it may tilt toward silence, reservoirs skinning over, avenues thickening into deer paths. But in the central precinct, a bell's small bronze spine continues to ring. The temple does not die, it lowers its voice and listens. He skirts a fallen fig, its trunk flayed where it lost an argument with wind, and comes to a doorway whose lintel bears the soft green weight of years. On the threshold, the footprints of monks have worn the stone to 2 shallow pools that fill and empty with the weather. A line of candles gutter inside, the flames stubborn in breathless air. A woman with lotus buds in a palm leaf basket kneels, presses her forehead to the step, and ties a red thread to an iron ring half buried in moss. The thread's bright seriousness looks like a word inserted into a sentence written in vines. Old people in nearby villages speak of guardians who made their home in the centuries of green. They call them Nik Ta, the land's spirits, some as small as lizards with crowns of dew, others strong enough to shrug trees from their shoulders. They say an unseen white elephant made rounds in the monsoon night, rubbing against pylons to keep their dreams from collapsing, that Apsaras descended like rain to polish soot from the gallery roofs, that a naga coiled under the moat turned in its sleep whenever lightning thought too loudly and thereby saved the corner towers from burning. Fringe tales, perhaps, and yet the lintels remain. The towers stand with rain blackening, then drying, then blackening again, and no one has ever persuaded the jungle to explain its tenderness. He stops where a root has stepped down across a wall and set its foot, enormous, deliberate, on a Devada's shoulder. The guardian's face is patient as a lamp in evening wind. The root descends in folds like cloth and disappears into earth with the serenity of an oath. Men will chisel, trees will find a seam. It is not enmity, it is a negotiation between slow powers. A gecko stares from the root's glossy elbow and clicks as if to count the years. Along the outer galleries he finds rooms given over to orchids, pale, quickening faces that open from the lintels as if the apsaras have taken to breathing with petals. In one chamber, a fig has opened the roof and poured a column of green light down the walls. Beneath, a Buddha glows with lichen, his fingers shining where pilgrims will not let moss take purchase. Grasses feather the crevices of the steps, spider silk catches a stray sun and turns it into a thread you could almost climb. He senses, once or twice, the feeling of being escorted. Not watched, escorted. As if whatever else lives in these rooms keeps to the corners, pads along beside him, and clears the path of the smallest dangers. The monks call them Preah Lok, spirits of place. Boatmen call them Yeek, forest giants, with gestures too gentle to be believed by those who never entered at dusk. Some say a white monkey perches on the central tower at new moon, counting the bats and naming them in a language no one else hears. Others say the towers themselves shift half a thumb's width on nights of true heat to let the stones breathe. He passes a library building where a strangler fig has wrapped a corner with the possessiveness of a lover. The root's pale skin carries a faint spiral of natural lines that resemble script. Once, a monk told him that the tree was reading the temple and copying it. He smiled at the tale then. Now, under leaves heavy with dripping, he's not sure he was right to smile. As the years slide, men come less often, roads fade, dynasties flow away, maps, insofar as they exist, prefer new coasts and ports. In the absence of armies and administrators, other hands take up the chore of guarding. Hunters leave offerings of betel under porches and step softly along the side paths. Fishermen pull their boats into reeds and do not laugh very loudly. Women with baskets of rice tuck small balls of sweetened coconut at the corners of shrines on days when the rain falls in sheets, so the little spirits can eat standing up. In seasons of lightning, monks put palm leaves at the tips of naga heads to sate sky hunger with green before it takes stone. Where the galleries flare into a cross, he kneels and lifts a bead of water from the flagging with one finger. It holds, skin, not drop, then breaks and becomes simply wet. Beneath the gloss, he can see the old incised lines masons cut to guide their chisels. It's as if the forest has laid a thin skin over a text and sometimes chooses to make it legible, sometimes not. Historians still argue whether Angkor Wat ever vanished into full oblivion, or whether it remained continuously known to those who mattered most to it, the monks, the boatmen, the villagers who lit lamps at the right hours and tied threads to worn rings. They argue whether lost is a word chosen by distant men to tell stories about their own arrival. The jungle keeps its own minutes. They are not written in the same book. He hears a rustle and looks up. Two macaques quarrel along a parapet, then vanish like an argument that decided to become a joke. A hornbill flaps between towers with a noise like bellows. Termite mounds raise their patient spires in the quiet corners of courts. Ants carry flakes of leaf like votive fans. Somewhere, out of sight, a snake passes with the theatrical discretion of silk pulled over a secret. Dusk tightens. The towers soften until they are mountains only in memory. Lamps draw out shadows with the juggler's skill. A monk lights a wick with a taper and leaves the light behind as if he were sowing a small field of stars. The jungle's breath cools, and with it comes the scent of wet stone unwrapped from the day. Iron and lime, a memory of sunlight now rinsed and set aside. Along the outer wall, a legend remembers its duties. A white deer is said to step from the underbrush on nights when the rain ends and walk the perimeter, pausing at each gate to lower its head without fear. Those who have seen it swear the creature leaves no print, though the mud pleads for one. He does not seek the deer. He looks at the dark edge of the moat where frogs begin their democracy and decides that some stories are true because they make the place breathe larger. He rests his hand upon a stone that has not moved in 900 seasons and thinks of all the roots that have touched it since. Hair fine, wrist thick, wrist again, and thicker, and then gone when a storm unstitched their grip. Every tendril and trunk has taught the temple another way to hold. Perhaps that is why Angkor never left. It learned from the trees that leaned upon it how to remain with grace. When he turns toward the gate, the galleries speak only in leaf shadow. A bat skims the row of apsaras and fails to raise them from their dance. The moat takes one last light and folds it like silk for later. The spirit threads on the iron rings stir, red in the almost night. The path out keeps its counsel, and behind him, the forest settles the temple into a long green arm and sleeps without closing its eyes. He wakes into a dawn that is more a slow exhalation than a sunrise. Mist sits on the moat like cream in a bowl, its edges blurred, its center holding still. Across the causeway, Angkor Wat's towers rise out of it like teeth from an unseen jaw, dark at the base, catching the first thin fire at their crowns. The sky makes promises in layers, pale apricot over blue steel, then a sweep of pearl that seems too fragile to bear the day. The scent is wet stone, monk's incense, and a faint musk from the jungle watching beyond the walls. He walks before the heat claims the flagstones, sandals whispering against grit. The causeway's Naga balustrades stretch beside him, their scales beaded with dew that trembles as if listening. Beyond, the moat mirrors the world upside down, temple above, temple below, both equally plausible. Somewhere in the mirrored one, the apsaras are dancing backward, their smiles pulling in rather than spilling out. He imagines stepping into that water world and asking them what they see when they look at him. A hard fact arrives with the day. Angkor Wat's precise east-west alignment is no accident. The entire structure was built to honor Vishnu, a god of preservation, with an axis pointing toward the sunrise on the spring equinox. The main causeway becomes a calendar in stone. The towers frame the sun exactly as it crests the horizon. This is engineering married to devotion, a blueprint carved into the earth so the heavens can keep their appointments. But in the margins, another tale moves. Old Khmer chronicles speak of a serpent bride who wed a mortal king, bringing with her a dowry of night rivers and rain clouds. In exchange, he built her a palace that could catch the first light of day and hold it still. Each dawn, as the mist lifts, she walks invisible through the corridors, ensuring the sun finds the towers in the right order, as if angling a crown on the head of the earth. Some say the moat is not water at all, but the skirt of her gown, spread wide to keep strangers from stumbling into her chambers uninvited. By the time he reaches the gate, the debate is already warming among scholars. Was this alignment meant purely for the equinox spectacle, or does it map an entire cosmology in stone? Historians still argue whether the bas-reliefs along the galleries double as an astronomical ledger, with gods and demons marking the movement of planets and the tilt of the ecliptic. The problem, of course, is that the original architects are 9 centuries gone, and the temple has not offered its blueprints to anyone willing to swear on a modern textbook. He passes under the central tower and into the gallery where light falls in long rectangular shafts, painting the dust motes in gold. A young monk sweeps the flagstones, his bare feet leaving prints that vanish almost before they are made. The broom's soft scrape echoes against the carved walls, mingling with the faint coo of pigeons roosting in the upper galleries. On the walls, the churning of the ocean of milk stretches in intricate relief. Gods and demons hauling on the serpent Vasuki to stir the cosmic sea, their faces calm in the middle of this mythic tug-of-war. The rope is a snake, the mountain at its center a pivot for creation itself. He traces a fingertip over one of the carved coils and feels the intention in it, like a pulse. Here, the air holds the weight of incense and the kind of stillness that makes a heartbeat sound like a drum. He imagines the centuries layering over this space, monks chanting, kings walking barefoot in ceremony, invaders moving through with eyes that did not belong here. The stones have stored all of it, neither rejecting nor erasing. If the serpent bride exists, she must spend a lot of time listening. In a side courtyard, the morning sun catches a set of lotus buds left in a clay pot. Their green is so precise, so undecided between bloom and secrecy, that it feels almost intentional, as if the flowers are in on the temple's plans. A lizard darts over the rim, pauses to drink the bead of water cupped in a leaf, and vanishes into shadow. By mid-morning, The temple fills with the sounds of a living day. Monks chanting in a tone that feels like breath turning into wind, roosters calling from the village beyond the moat, the crunch of sand under bicycle tires. He slips into one of the libraries, its windows narrow slits that let in light like measured blessings. Dust hangs in it like powdered gold. Shelves long gone once held palm leaf manuscripts. Now only the smell of old paper remains, mixed with the scent of stone that has been both heated and cooled 1,000 times. On a sill, a single black feather rests, its edges tipped with bronze, perhaps dropped by a crow, or perhaps by something less willing to explain itself. In the far corner, he notices faint scratch marks on the wall. Not vandalism, but something older. Lines crossing in careful patterns, as if someone tried to make the temple speak in a code that only stone could keep. Were these masons marking progress, or monks mapping constellations? Historians still argue over such things, their debates polite but edged like blades wrapped in silk. Meanwhile, the marks remain, shrugging at interpretation. Stepping back into the open, he finds the mist has fully lifted, leaving the towers sharp against the blue. The moat no longer looks like a mirror, but like a held breath, waiting for the next cloud to break its surface. Tourists have begun to gather near the causeway, cameras raised, voices lowered in the face of the architecture. Somewhere behind him, a monk's bell rings 3 times, each note hanging in the air until the jungle swallows it. He walks toward the far corner of the complex, where fewer visitors go, and stands in a doorway that frames a view of palm trees and sky. The wind picks up, and for a moment, he swears the carved devatas shift, just slightly, as if resettling their shoulders. He blinks, and they are stone again. Maybe the serpent bride is watching from the moat. Maybe the towers are turning their ears toward the sun. Or maybe, just maybe, the temple is aligning itself for another 1,000 years. He moves along the inner terrace when the sun has gentled into amber, and the sandstone begins to show its second face. It is a quiet alchemy. The gray of noon loosens into warm honey. Tool marks soften, hairline seams glow as if lines of old writing are surfacing through a palimpsest. Here, secrets lie not behind doors, but within the very grain of the walls, waiting for the light to slant at the angle that teaches the eye a new alphabet. A monk beckons him into a dim chamber beneath the central tower. The ceiling is soot dark, the air steeped in beeswax, and the quiet exhale of old incense. He lets his eyes settle. Then he sees them, fugitive colors that cling to the stone where time forgot to erase them. A circlet of red above a devada's brow, a feathered black traced along her eyelids, a fine saffron wash at the hem of a dancer's skirt. Once, Angkor Wat was not the color of bare stone. It was painted, breathed upon by pigments ground from earth and leaf and ash. Historical fact anchors the vision. Conservators in recent years revealed microscopic residues of reds, blacks, and even delicate gold leaf. And in inner corridors, hidden murals, boats, towers, and floral tracery, ghosted beneath centuries of smoke. The temple the world knows as monochrome once wore a dawn. He kneels and watches as the monk angles a lamp, coaxing another scene from a wall that looked blank at first glance. A quick sketch of a barge with its prow lifted like a song. A tiny procession of umbrellas, a line that might be a lotus stem or might be a river. It is not grand art, but it is intimate. Proof that hands returned to these stones long after the chisels fell silent, making additions in ink and fire. Those additions complicate the tale. This was never a place locked in a single century. It received layers, it forgot some, it kept others like a fondness. Outside, he walks the galleries with a different attention. At the base of a pillar, a row of small, precise holes runs like a constellation. They are not damage, they are measure. The masons set chords in these string holes, pulling lines true across long runs of stone, translating cosmology into geometry. Along some door frames, shallow grids appear where plaster once held color true. Along others, faint gouges tell where wooden scaffolds bit and held while men moved the mountain upward. Every trace is a sentence the builders left for those who would listen with fingertips as well as eyes. Beyond the cloister, he crosses to a corner where a stair meets a retaining wall, and he crouches to examine the seam between laterite and sandstone. The lower courses are rough, iron-rich, dark as old bread. Above them, pale blocks sit with joints thin as breath. No mortar glues those faces, only weight, friction, and a precision that makes blades shy to enter. Historians still argue how such weight came to rest here from the quarries at Phnom Kulen, dozens of kilometers away. Elephants and men, yes. Rafts and canals, certainly. But also a logistics so smooth it left few scars. LiDAR has mapped roads and embankments pressed flat into the forest's memory, avenues for stone to float and roll, a city-sized promise to move mountains by method rather than miracle. And yet the miracle remains, housed in method. He stands upon the causeway and thinks of the ground beneath. Angkor's engineers knew water's second language, the slow talk of aquifers and undersands, and set the temple upon foundations of compacted earth that breathe with the monsoon. The moat is not a necklace, it is a counterweight, a long hand placed upon the groundwater to keep the temple from sinking into its own sand. In seasons of wet, the moat rises and holds the table steady. In dry, it gives back. This partnership of stone and water is why the steps still ring beneath his heel. He feels, rather than hears, the arithmetic of it, load spread, pressure equalized, slabs keyed and stitched by hidden tenons. Some joints conceal stone dowels like bones, some thresholds rest upon beds of sand laid to accept the small movements of heat and year. The temple is not rigid, it survives by a grace of measured yielding, and still, the sandstone keeps its confessions carefully. In a side court, a column bears a web of hairline fractures that never advance. Why? Perhaps because the stone has learned to breathe from both faces, perhaps because the tower's weight above delivers a constant settling pressure that closes the cracks each time they consider ambition. Structural resilience is its own riddle. Engineers debate, was this foresight, an indigenous science, or did success rest upon countless small corrections made with eyes and hands over decades? Historians still argue whether a written canon of building existed, or whether knowledge traveled mouth to ear, callus to callus, lost whenever a guild's last elder laid down his tools. Fringe belief walks the colonnade at dusk. In nearby villages, they tell that blood was mixed into the plaster to give it strength, that the best resins were stirred with prayers whose syllables hardened like stone. Some insist a secret metal lattice runs within the central tower, woven from sky iron fallen in a rain of stars and hammered into bars under oaths that bind true. The more learned scoff, naming laterites iron tang and the patient virtue of wedged joints. Yet at night, when lightning counts the towers and moves on, even the learned refrain from calling the legends foolish. There are metals here, the earth's own, but the temple's deeper alloy is devotion. He returns to the chamber where the hidden murals linger. A conservator once described the pigment's thinness as breathwork, a veil of color applied to let the stone continue to speak. He likes the phrase. It suits another discovery. Faint traces of black linework beneath the great bas-reliefs, charcoal maps that guided the carver's first cuts. Draw, then breathe depth into the drawing. In places, you can see where a chisel chose mercy, sparing the softness of a cheek by leaving the underline intact. In others, the line stutters where the artisan corrected himself mid-strike. Mastery keeps its hesitations as relics. Along the western gallery, a narrow window gives onto a runnel carved into the paving. He follows it to a small stone basin near a stair. Rainwater gathers here in patient increments, then spills along a hidden channel into the courtyard. The place taught water how to enter and leave without offense. He pictures monsoon sheets and sees the temple shedding them as a bird shakes rain from its feathers, turning deluge into gloss, gloss into drainage, drainage into a clear field for pilgrims' feet. That the floors remain passable after storms is a quiet achievement. He salutes it with a hand upon the parapet, a vow to remember modest miracles. He passes through another doorway and feels a cool breath lift from the floor. Somewhere beneath, a hollow. Local tales claim Angkor is honeycombed with secret chambers and buried galleries where kings hid both bones and vows. Modern probes have suggested cavities beneath the central shrine, places the earth keeps as lungs. What they held, relics, offerings, or simply the deliberate emptiness that lets weight sit kindly, remains undecided. Mysteries at Angkor prefer partial light. They show a shoulder, not a face. Beyond the outer wall, the jungle's green rises like surf, but the temple continues its disclosures. On a pillar's base, he finds a builder's mark, two neat wedges beside a circle, repeated on stones far apart, a code that married block to course, workshop to wall. Such marks tie Angkor to human hands more intimately than any legend can. Crews with nicknames, stones with addresses, a ledger of labor that once made sense at a glance. The code has lost its key, but not its tenderness. Someone signed this. Toward evening, he stands within the cruciform terrace where four galleries meet. Light enters from every quarter and comes to rest at the center as though that space were hungering. He closes his eyes. Beneath his feet, a million weighed decisions hold. Above, towers rest upon voids chosen to be voids. Around him, paint that pretended to be flower and boat remembers how to bloom, then recedes into stone. LiDAR's measured grid outside the walls has redrawn the city as vast and intricate. The myth of a single, isolated temple has been replaced by the truth of an urban web braided to rice, canal, law, and right. Yet this center remains stubborn, indifferent to discoveries, does not need to be lost or found to know itself. He opens his eyes to the last light pooling along the floor. Men or gods who built this remains the wrong grammar. Men built, that is certain. The gods, if they entered, did so by invitation, written in alignment, drainage, pigment, and patience. The sandstone keeps its counsel, but the color at the Devada's eyelids, the whispering channels beneath the paving, the string holes like small stars along the pier, they all lean toward the same answer. Intelligence shaped by reverence, reverence armed with craft. Historians still argue where to find the line between them. The stone declines to draw it and simply endures. Night begins at the edges, folding the murals back into their sleep. He turns toward the western stair, carrying with him the knowledge that Angkor's most difficult secrets are not occult, but ordinary, and therefore sacred. The walls murmur nothing. The floor, steady under his heel, says all that needs saying. The last climb of the day carries him toward the highest platform, where the central tower rises like a stalk of stone from the body of the earth. The steps here are narrow and abrupt, their risers high enough to pull his knees into a rhythm almost like supplication. Each pause between steps grants a wider horizon, first the moat flashing bronze in the sun's slant, then the forest crowding close, then, higher still, the distant trace of other towers like stone ships moored in green tides. Within the uppermost gallery, shadows lengthen between the columns. The air feels different here, less like wind and more like the slow exhale of a chamber that has kept its breath for centuries. The floor underfoot bears the polished gloss of millions of steps, each one carrying some version of a question. Was this built by the calloused hand or by the divine? It is here, in this cloistered height, that both answers fit without offense. Along the inner walls, the bas-reliefs take on their final transformation in the evening light. Battle lines sharpen, celestial dancers appear to pivot as shadows slip behind their shoulders and the bodies of gods swell with a lifelike roundness the midday glare never grants. One figure, Vishnu, reclining upon the cosmic serpent, seems to draw the last light into his palm, as though storing it for a dawn none of us will see. The historical record states plainly that Angkor Wat was originally dedicated to Vishnu, a rarity in a Khmer Empire more often aligned to Shiva. That dedication, some scholars argue, carried political weight as much as piety, tethering the ruler to divine protector and preserver. But a different story walks here, one told by whispers in the village beyond the moat, that the central tower houses the pillar where heaven and earth once touched, and that at night the gods descend in silence to renew the bond. Skeptics dismiss this as the inevitable embroidery of a people living in the shadow of grandeur. Still, as the gold light bleeds into violet, the space feels like a waiting room between worlds. From this height, the engineering is even more stark. The alignment with the cardinal points is so precise that the setting sun now pours directly along the western axis, a spear of light that does not waver, as though the earth itself were holding still for the moment. Historians still argue whether this was purely an astronomical calendar, a symbolic map of the cosmos, or both. The builders, long gone, have left no manual, only the result, which answers in gold and shadow. He steps to the balustrade and looks down at the avenues, now empty of the day's pilgrims. From here, The moat's four corners catch the sky and make four new suns, each trembling in water. Beyond that, the forest rises and falls in slow waves, hiding the lines of ancient reservoirs and causeways that once made this the beating heart of an empire. In the far distance, a brief shimmer, perhaps a modern roof, perhaps the ghost of another tower, flashes, then vanishes. He lingers as the last strip of daylight abandons the gallery. In the deepening dark, the stone cools and the sound changes. No more chatter of visitors, no more shuffle of sandals, only the chorus of night insects, the occasional wing beat, and the distant sigh of wind moving through trees older than any inscription. Now the temple is as it was for most of its life, empty of crowds, full of breath. The gods, if they ever walked here, might prefer this hour. And the men who carved each lotus petal and each warrior's braid would recognize it too, the shift from the day's spectacle to the night's possession. He closes his eyes, palms resting on the balustrade's serpent skin, feeling the shallow grooves cut to mimic scales. They are warm still, holding the last of the sun. In that warmth is the proof he sought, not that gods carved these stones, but that men, believing in gods, carved them so well that the question would never be easily settled. The wind picks up, and with it comes the scent of wet earth and flowers that bloom after dark. The temple exhales, and for a moment it seems to lean closer, as if to share the last quiet truth, one that cannot be written, only felt in the ribs and the spine. The wind down begins. The stone cools to the touch, and the towers fade into silhouettes against a sky scattered with the first stars. The water in the moat lies still, a mirror no one looks into, holding the last light of the day in its black glass. You stand in the hush, aware of the millions of hours that have passed here without witness, of the hands that set each block in place and then vanished into the centuries. The forest murmurs at the edges, a slow pulse of leaves turning in the night air. The bas-reliefs sleep now, their wars and dances wrapped in shadow, waiting for the next dawn to bring them to life again. Somewhere far below, water moves through channels cut with an accuracy no rain could erase. In the dark, the line between what was built and what was born blurs. The towers might be mountains, the walls might be cliffs, the carvings might be vines in stone. Men or gods, does it matter? The hands that shaped this place believed in something larger than themselves, and that belief still holds the stones, still draws the questions, still folds the night around you like a cloak. You breathe in the warm air, feel the cool grit beneath your fingers, and listen as the jungle and the temple speak in the same unhurried tongue. Whatever answer you came for, let it rest here. The question will keep.